On what seemed like a peaceful evening, an urgent phone call shattered the quiet night. On the other end was the frantic, breathless voice of a woman struggling to speak. "Please, help me," she pleaded desperately. "I've been shot." That 911 call wasn't just a cry for help. It was the sound that marked the beginning of a hidden tragedy, the unraveling of a seemingly perfect life. The victim, a 51-year-old woman, had just returned home after a peaceful church service. She walked into her garage, a space that should have been safe, but in an instant, everything transformed into a horrific scene. A man wrapped his arm around her neck, held a gun to her head, and demanded her purse. But instead of complying, an unexpected instinct to resist surged within her. She struggled, looking directly into her attacker's eyes, and in that moment, her gaze also met the cold barrel of the gun. The surge of adrenaline clouded her reason, and instead of handing over her purse, she threw her bag of groceries at his chest. That resistance ignited the assailant's rage. A single gunshot rang out, piercing her face. She collapsed, unconscious in her own blood. Miraculously, she survived. With extraordinary willpower, her body slowly regained consciousness. Lying in a pool of blood, she used her last ounce of strength to crawl towards her car, but the emergency call button didn't work. Refusing to give up, she struggled to her feet, walked into the house herself, disarmed the alarm system, and called 911 from the kitchen. Paramedics and police quickly arrived. When asked who had done this, she could only vaguely describe a man in his 20s, with a strong chin, a beard, black-rimmed glasses, and a hat. At the hospital, doctors couldn't believe she had survived. The bullet had taken an unbelievable path, through her right temple, part of her right eye, down her throat, and lodged in her lung, miraculously avoiding all other vital organs. This was a medical miracle, a testament to the powerful human will to survive. What's the small lesson learned from this moment? In our most dangerous moments, when facing death, our most primitive instincts emerge. This isn't just a biological reaction, but also proof of extraordinary mental strength, of the desperate yet resilient ability to cling to life. Nancy Howard not only survived physically, but also became a symbol of spiritual resilience. And as this story began to unfold, a man appeared, consumed by profound grief. It was Nancy's husband, a respected figure in the community. But was that grief real, or merely the beginning of a perfect facade hiding a much darker secret? We'll discover that in the next part, Survival Against All Odds, A Will to Live. In the previous part, we witnessed the terrifying moment when a peaceful life was torn apart by a sudden act of violence. But what truly made this case extraordinary was not just the brutality of the attack, but the immense will to survive of the victim, Nancy Howard, who miraculously cheated death. After the fateful shot that pierced her face, Nancy collapsed, losing consciousness. Many moments passed, steeped in darkness and pain. However, by a primal instinct, her body slowly but steadily began to regain consciousness. Lying in a pool of blood, she used her remaining strength to crawl towards her car, hoping to find help from the emergency call button inside. But the button didn't work because the engine hadn't been started. In that desperate moment, with death so close, an internal command rang in her mind, an urge to get up, to act. This is characteristic of a person in a fight-or-flight response, where surging adrenaline not only provides extraordinary physical strength, but also creates incredible focus. Overcoming pain and weakness, Nancy struggled to her feet. She walked into the house, which had been violated, managed to disarm the security alarm system, and went straight into the laundry room, just a few steps from the garage door. Looking at her own horrifying reflection in the mirror, the harsh truth that she might die dawned on her. But even when faced with that reality, the will to live burned fiercely. She continued to move, walked into the kitchen, and called 911, providing what little information she had about her attacker. When law enforcement and medical personnel arrived, they couldn't believe what they were witnessing.
Hospital staff later confirmed that Nancy's survival was a miracle. The bullet had taken an unbelievable path, through her right temple, part of her right eye, down her throat, and lodged in one of her lungs, but somehow bypassed other vital organs. This is a testament not only to luck, but also a symbol of human spiritual strength and extraordinary endurance.
What's the profound psychological lesson here? In the darkest moments, when everything seems to collapse, the will to live, the instinct to cling to hope, and the ability to transcend our own limits are what truly define us. Nancy's story is not just a case, but also a powerful reminder of the hidden strength within each person when facing seemingly insurmountable adversity. And while Nancy was fighting for her life on the operating table, another important figure emerged, bearing the appearance of extreme grief and anxiety. It was her husband, Frank, who was supposedly away for work. Would his appearance bring hope, or was it just the beginning of a more sophisticated facade? We'll find out in the next part, The Grieving Husband, A Mask of Sorrow. While Nancy Howard was fighting for her life on the operating table, another important character appeared in this story, her husband, Frank. He was supposedly away on a business trip at the time of the attack. Upon receiving the horrific news about his wife, Frank was described as having an emotional breakdown over the phone, then rushed home immediately. He arrived at the hospital sobbing uncontrollably, clearly in shock and extremely worried, presenting the image of a deeply grieving husband. He stayed by Nancy's bedside until medical staff informed him that her condition was very positive. Only then did Frank regain his composure and was ready to speak with the police. Initially, Frank appeared as a symbol of grief and anxiety, a model husband enduring a family tragedy. He even spoke of his wife as loving, generous, always willing to help others, even a stranger who needed money for a hotel room. He was willing to cooperate with the police, agreeing to let them analyze his cell phone. This outward appearance was almost perfect, without a hint of suspicion. However, it was from that seemingly harmless phone that the first clues began to reveal a different truth. Just a few days later, investigators began to focus their attention on Frank's possible involvement. The reason? Data from Frank's phone incriminated him. He was having a long-term affair with another woman named Susan. Frank had not been on a business trip as he claimed, but was actually with his mistress. When cornered by the police, who even asked the hospital not to allow him to visit Nancy, Frank was forced to confess the truth about his relationship to both Nancy and his daughters. He tried to downplay the severity, claiming this was the only reason the police suspected him. His daughters, in shock, advised their father to get a lawyer. Frank complied, and the focus of the investigation on him temporarily subsided. From a psychological perspective, Frank's behavior at this point is a classic example of wearing a social mask. Individuals with personality disorders often excel at constructing a reliable and perfect outward image to hide their true nature. Frank displayed grief very convincingly, influencing both his family and initially the police. This was not just ordinary deception, but a form of emotional manipulation, making it difficult for others to believe that behind that respectable facade lay a dark secret. His quick move to find a lawyer after his affair was discovered also showed a degree of calculation and self-preservation rather than simply being a misguided man. What's the lesson here? Sometimes, the people we trust the most, those who appear the most perfect, can hide the deepest and darkest secrets. Appearances can be deceiving, and it's important to look deeper into true behavior and motives, especially when there are unusual signs. Frank's affair temporarily diverted the investigation, but other seemingly unrelated clues began to emerge, leading investigators to a much larger picture. A picture of a meticulously planned conspiracy was slowly coming to light. We will uncover those clues in the next part, unveiling the double life, infidelity, and deception. In the previous part, we witnessed Frank Howard's perfect facade begin to crack as his affair was exposed. However, this affair was not just a simple personal secret. It was a gateway that led to a complex double life full of deception, much deeper than investigators initially imagined.
After temporarily deflecting police attention by hiring a lawyer, investigators continued to search for other clues. They began to re-examine all the evidence, and it was during this process that new discoveries emerged, completely changing the direction of the investigation. One of the first discoveries was Nancy's purse. It was found in a nearby trash can, and remarkably, her cell phone was still inside. However, there was a strange detail. Nancy's driver's license had been removed from the purse. This led investigators to believe that the perpetrator had confirmed her identity before discarding these items. This was a sign that the attack was not a random act, but a deliberate, meticulously planned one. The next discovery further strengthened the hypothesis of a planned conspiracy. When reviewing security footage from the church Nancy had attended a few hours before the shooting, an ominous image became clear. In the footage, Nancy drove into the parking lot, parked, and went inside the church. But immediately after, a silver car followed her, pulled up, and parked. When Nancy went inside, this car drove away, then returned, parked again, and a man was seen entering the church, using the restroom, and then returning to the car. When Nancy left the church and drove away, this silver car continued to follow. Unfortunately, the low resolution of the footage could not clearly show any facial features or license plates.
Nevertheless, another police officer pointed out an alarming coincidence. A few weeks before the shooting, she had stopped a white Honda Accord in the same neighborhood where Nancy's family lived. That car was registered at an address several hours away. The officer had witnessed this car driving aimlessly in the area for several hours. This encounter was recorded by her patrol car's dashcam. The driver identified himself as Dustin Hirams, initially saying he was looking for his uncle's house, then changing it to his stepfather's house, and finally to a family friend named Mr. John. Both men in the car were allowed to leave, but investigators felt that these men might be connected to the shooting. However, when Nancy was shown their photos, she confirmed that they were not her attacker. From a psychological perspective, these pieces began to paint a much more complex picture than a simple robbery. The attacker confirming the victim's identity and the victim being followed suggested a haunting and deliberate element to the crime. It was not spontaneous, but a meticulous, pre-planned preparation. The repeated appearance of the strange car in the area, along with Dustin Hiram's conflicting statements, suggested a more complex network operating in the shadows. Just as a criminal psychologist pieces together behavioral fragments to create a complete profile, investigators were slowly connecting disparate clues to identify a larger conspiracy. What's the lesson here? Sometimes, seemingly minor details, insignificant coincidences, are the threads that lead to hidden truths. In criminal psychology, identifying behavioral fingerprints, however subtle, is key to uncovering the darkest secrets. These clues led investigators in a completely new direction, a path that would reveal not only who pulled the trigger, but also a much more mysterious mastermind, someone who pulled the strings of destiny for the victim from the shadows. We will discover this shocking truth in the next part, The Unseen Hand, From Robbery to Conspiracy. From a dramatic robbery, fragmented clues now began to connect, revealing a much more terrifying picture. This was not a random incident, but a complex conspiracy orchestrated by an unseen hand. The shift from a personal crime to a sophisticated plan completely reshaped the investigation. Investigators, after meticulously reviewing the evidence, began to recognize an ominous pattern. The discovery of victim Nancy's wallet with her identification removed was not just the act of a hasty robber. It showed deliberation, an intent to identify her before disposing of the evidence. This raised the question, why would the attacker need to know who Nancy was if this was just a random robbery? The next piece came from surveillance footage at the church where Nancy had attended services. That blurry footage captured a mysterious silver car following Nancy. This car appeared after hers, then left and returned, and a man from that car even entered the church. This entire stalking behavior, though no faces were clear, confirmed the hypothesis that Nancy was a chosen target, not a random victim. This was a clear sign of preparation, a systematic tracking, far beyond the actions of a petty thief. Furthermore, the information about the police stop with Dustin Hiram's added to the complexity. A strange car, wandering aimlessly in the victim's neighborhood weeks earlier, with Dustin's evasive, contradictory explanations for his presence. Although Nancy did not recognize Dustin as her attacker, his presence in the area, along with vague statements about a Mr. John, sowed suspicion of a larger network operating in the shadows. From a criminal psychology perspective, these pieces transformed a seemingly simple case into a study of psychological manipulation and planning. The mastermind not only wanted to commit the crime, but also wanted to control the situation, ensuring the objective was carried out precisely. Identifying the victim before the attack, systematic stalking behavior, and the presence of scouts in the area are all characteristics of a carefully calculated plan, not impulsive behavior. This brings to mind those who manipulate from behind the scenes, those who don't directly act but are the architects of pain and destruction. What's the lesson here? Sometimes the smallest, seemingly unrelated clues are the key to unlocking the biggest secrets. In the world of crime, nothing is random, especially when there's preparation and surveillance. Every action, every trace, is a piece in the psychological puzzle of the perpetrator. And just as these pieces were slowly fitting together, an unexpected statement from an unlikely source emerged, promising to fully reveal the identity of the mastermind behind this dark conspiracy. We will discover that shocking truth in the next part, the informant unraveling the web of deceit. As the pieces of the conspiracy slowly connected, an unexpected light shone from an unlikely place, inside a prison. About a week after the horrifying shooting, investigators received a phone call from the county jail, informing them that an inmate named Billy Earl Johnson claimed to have detailed information about the case and wanted to speak with the police in charge of the case. This was an opportunity not to be missed. The interview with Billy Earl Johnson was arranged. From the outset, Billy proved to be a cunning and calculating individual. He did not hesitate to boast about his reputation and declared he had an ace up his sleeve. Billy claimed to hold the secret to the attack and demanded a clear agreement in exchange for information. "I'm not giving anything away until I get something concrete," he said. "I'll die with it if I don't get anything in return." Billy insisted that the victim did not deserve what happened and deserved justice, but he also wanted his back scratched, meaning he wanted benefits from cooperating. After withholding information for a while, Billy finally provided details that could verify the authenticity of his statements. He began to accurately describe Nancy's car, brand new, dark blue, four-door, and hatchback style. These detailed descriptions convinced investigators of his credibility, and a deal was struck. The specific details of this agreement were not publicly disclosed, but it was clear that it was appealing enough for Billy to begin unraveling the mystery. Billy revealed that a man named Mr. John had heard stories about him and had actively reached out. "He didn't know me, but he heard I might be the right person to do a job," Billy recounted. Mr. John's purpose was to make the incident look like a carjacking or a purse snatching so no one would suspect him. Billy claimed that two people were directly involved in the shooting, a driver and a shooter, although he could not pinpoint their exact roles. He also provided a contact phone number for Mr. John and revealed that he had more than 50 conversations with Mr. John about the scheme. It turned out that Billy was the leader of a gang called Hee Haw in the eastern area. He claimed that Mr. John was the one who arranged for Nancy to be shot. Billy also said that many others could corroborate his testimony, including Dustin Hiras, the man we saw in the earlier traffic stop who turned out to be Billy's stepson. Investigators immediately contacted Dustin and brought him in for an interview. Although Dustin admitted to being under the influence of drugs during the interview, he still asserted that Mr. John was a big player, someone who was throwing money at everyone to persuade them to kill Nancy. Dustin also revealed that more than a dozen people knew about this murder-for-hire plot, including Charlie Louderman, whom Billy had hired as a bodyguard.
Charlie Louderman, also in prison at the time, was interviewed and confirmed Dustin's statements. Charlie said that Mr. John was the one providing the money, and Billy Earl Johnson was initially hired to shoot Nancy. But when Billy decided not to do it himself, he tried to push the job onto many others, while keeping a portion of the money. When this plan failed, Billy began to defraud Mr. John, continuously demanding more money by making excuses like police being near the scene or too many people around. Mr. John provided the money without hesitation, initially cash, then bank transfers, buying Billy guns, tractors, cars, anything he wanted. From a psychological perspective, Billy Earl Johnson's behavior clearly demonstrates the psychology of an opportunist and manipulator. He was not just a criminal, but also a skilled information broker, knowing how to bargain and exploit his advantage. His continuous extortion from Mr. John showed his lack of ethics and his ability to take advantage of others' desperation. What's the lesson from this part? In the underworld, there is no absolute loyalty. Personal gain and fear can cause even the most seemingly solid alliances to crumble, and those hired to commit crimes can become crucial factors in exposing the truth. And as these statements were connected to the financial trail, the true identity of Mr. John was revealed, a truth that would send shivers down everyone's spine. We will discover that shocking identity in the next part, the ultimate betrayal, Frank Howard's dark motives. As the pieces from the testimonies of Billy Earl Johnson, Dustin Hirams, and Charlie Louderman began to fit together, a clear but devastating picture emerged. Investigators tracked the series of money transfers that Charlie Louderman mentioned. They discovered that Mr. John had sent a total of $850,000 to various members of the Hee Haw gang. And when the photo of Mr. John finally reached the police, the truth became chillingly clear. Mr. John was none other than John Franklin Howard, or Frank, Nancy's husband of 29 years. Frank Howard was immediately arrested and charged with aggravated solicitation to commit murder. He was released on a $1 million bond, a colossal sum, but remarkably, many friends and family members contributed together to help him get out of jail just days after his arrest. This showed the extent of Frank's social standing and respect within the community. The fact that a seemingly respectable man, trusted and loved, was the mastermind behind the brutal attack on his own wife was a shock not only to the community, but also to Nancy herself. She had always maintained that she didn't believe Frank could be involved, as they had had a happy marriage for 29 years, had 3 children, and were a very religious family, always involved in community activities. Frank had never exhibited any characteristics of someone who could do such a thing.
However, Nancy's perspective began to change while awaiting Frank's trial. She noticed that from 2009 to 2012, when Frank took on a new job as CFO for a man who supplied resources to the military, he had become a different person, more confident, but also much more mysterious. From a psychological perspective, Frank Howard's degradation is a terrifying study of the human mind's corruption when consumed by greed and concealment. Frank was not a random killer, he was an architect of suffering. Frank's primary motive turned out to be far more complex than a simple affair. The 3-year-long affair with Susan was a significant factor. Frank had lavished money on Susan, spending approximately $1.9 million on their lifestyle, including a second home and a condo, and had given Susan $500,000 in cash. This affair reached a turning point when Susan sent Frank a high-pressure message a few weeks before the shooting. "I'm so tired of being alone. You need to file for divorce by this Friday or end it. I've waited long enough." Frank responded with a love letter, saying he was dealing with the issue and knew what he needed to do. This message was believed to be the catalyst, pushing Frank to his final decision. However, the financial motive was the ultimate factor. Richard Raley, Frank's former boss, revealed at the trial that Frank had systematically embezzled over $30 million from him during their 3 years of working together. This was the very money Frank used to pay the Hee Haw gang to commit the crime.
The prosecutor concluded that, in addition to his extramarital affair and increasing disdain for his wife of nearly 30 years, Frank must have known that a divorce would expose his financial misconduct. Frank couldn't let that happen. Frank Howard's psychology revealed a severe lack of empathy and an inflated ego. The fact that he could coldly plan to kill his wife, even sending a loving email to Nancy on the very day of the shooting, in which he said, "I love you and can't wait to come home to you," showed a terrifying detachment from human emotion and an ability to maintain a normal facade while hiding malicious intent. The prosecutor called this behavior sick, a term that truly captured the essence of this psychological perversion. Frank rationalized his actions, seeing his wife's death as a solution to his financial and emotional problems, a way to maintain the empire of lies he had built. What's the heartbreaking lesson from this case? Behind the facade of success, reputation, and family happiness, a dark abyss of greed, betrayal, and moral decay can hide. When an individual is drawn into a spiral of lies and a desire for control, they can be willing to do anything, even destroy the lives of their dearest loved ones, to protect their secrets and maintain their illusion. And when all the evidence had been gathered, the trial began, where the naked truth about Frank Howard and his accomplices was exposed to the light of justice. We will discover what happened in the trial and the final verdict in the next part, The Trial, a Battle for Truth and Consequences.
With overwhelming evidence gathered, though largely circumstantial and psychological, it was substantial enough to secure a conviction, and the legal battle against Frank Howard began. This was not just a criminal trial, but an ideological confrontation where the darkest secrets of the human mind were exposed to the light of justice. Frank Howard's trial took place over nearly 3 weeks in August 2014. The main focus of the trial was Frank's double life, particularly his extramarital affair, which was presented as the primary motive for this murder-for-hire plot. Prosecutors attempted to convince the jury that Frank had sought to kill his wife. The prosecution presented much evidence showing Frank's involvement. This included detailed call logs between Frank and Michael Speck, with some calls occurring on the very day of the shooting. They also had images of spreadsheets tracking every money transfer Frank had made to the Hee Haw gang. Additionally, a detailed analysis of Frank's 3-year affair with Susan, including his purchase of a second home and a condo, as well as documentation showing Frank had given Susan $500,000 in cash and spent approximately $1.9 million on their lifestyle, all were presented in court. Another crucial piece of evidence was the message Susan sent Frank a few weeks before the shooting. "I'm so tired of being alone. You need to file for divorce by this Friday or end it. I've waited long enough." The prosecutor believed this was the catalyst, prompting Frank to act. Frank responded with a love letter, asserting he was addressing the issue and knew what he needed to do. Nancy Howard, the attacked wife, testified, detailing the night she was shot and her difficult recovery journey. But an even more difficult moment was when Frank, over the phone at the hospital, confessed to her about his affair with Susan Leontief. The prosecutor even displayed a photo of Frank and Susan with her children at Frank's desk. Susan also testified, saying she loved Frank and was living with him in an apartment, but was fed up because Frank kept promising divorce but never followed through. Frank's defense, led by attorney Ricky Parrott, argued that the affair was not the main issue in this case, and Frank was not being tried for adultery. They focused on discrediting the prosecution's witnesses, especially Billy Earl Johnson, asserting that a person could not be convicted based on the testimony of those kinds of people. They also argued that the idea of Frank wanting to kill his wife of 29 years just to get a divorce was absurd, because Frank had been through a divorce before Nancy. Frank's children, Ashley, Jay, and Brianna, also testified in their father's defense, saying they always knew him to be a kind and compassionate man. However, in closing arguments, the prosecutor called Frank sick after presenting an email Frank had sent to Nancy on the very day of the shooting. "I know you have a busy day today. I'll try to call you today. I love you and can't wait to come home to you." The prosecutor emphasized the irony and cruelty of this message. That's sick. He wanted to come home for her coffin. That's what he wanted to come back to. The trial lasted almost 3 weeks, but the jury only took 2 hours to reach a decision. Frank Howard was found guilty of aggravated solicitation to commit murder. From a psychological perspective, this trial was a clear exposé of the breakdown in the perpetrator's perception and rationalization. Frank, with his inflated ego and manipulative abilities, did not collapse in the usual way. He still believed in his vision, viewing investigators as people who couldn't understand his masterpiece. This is a classic example of extreme narcissistic personality disorder, where an individual is incapable of feeling remorse or recognizing the severity of their wrongdoing. His anger was not about guilt, but because his work was misunderstood and destroyed by inferior people. What's the lesson here? Justice sometimes has to contend with twisted minds, those who believe they are serving a higher purpose, regardless of the cost to others' lives and souls. The trial was not just a process of seeking legal justice, but also a struggle to expose the psychological truth behind deceptive appearances. And after that fateful verdict, the story still wasn't over. The consequences of the crime, forgiveness, and indelible scars remained. We will explore these legacies in the next part: the aftermath, justice, forgiveness, and lingering scars. The legal confrontation with Frank Howard has concluded. He was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. This wasn't the end of a typical criminal hunt. It was a bitter victory because the mastermind didn't yield out of fear or remorse, but out of the sheer arrogance of a sick mind. Frank never admitted to being a criminal. He steadfastly maintained his role as a researcher who had proven his theory in the most cruel and unethical way possible. Frank's sentence was not only based on circumstantial evidence of his psychological manipulation, but also on a combination of in-depth behavioral analysis and painful testimony from victims who fortunately escaped his control. Those who were once haunted by true crimes now became living proof of the danger when a sick theory possesses the mind. Their recovery process was a long and challenging journey, as they not only had to fight the fear from imprisoned memories, but also the very ideas and beliefs that Frank had instilled in them.
Richard Raley, Frank's former boss, who hired Frank as CFO from 2009 to 2012, the period Nancy felt Frank had changed, testified at the sentencing hearing. Richard revealed that over 3 years of working together, Frank had systematically embezzled over $30 million from him. This was the very money Frank used to pay the Hee Haw gang to commit the crime. Prosecutors concluded that, in addition to his extramarital affairs and increasing contempt for his wife of nearly 30 years, Frank must have known that a divorce would expose these horrific financial misdeeds. After Frank was convicted, Ashley, Jay, and Brianna, his 3 children, were extremely angry. All 3 left the courtroom without saying goodbye to their mother, Nancy. Throughout the trial, all 3 children sided with their father, testifying that they did not believe he had done it. This incident shows the deep scars that Frank's crime left within the family, not only with Nancy, but also with their own children. Regarding the fate of those directly involved, Michael Speck, Billy's nephew, testified against Michael Lawrence, asserting Lawrence was the shooter. Michael Lawrence was subsequently sentenced to 60 years in prison. He quickly appealed the sentence, and in 2017, the conviction was overturned on the grounds that evidence related to the murder-for-hire conspiracy was misleading. In his retrial, Lawrence was acquitted. However, the prosecutor decided to change the charges, trying him for conspiracy to commit the murder of Nancy Howard. Ultimately, Lawrence reached a plea deal and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Meanwhile, Michael Speck received a 12-year sentence after testifying against Lawrence. Notably, Billy Earl Johnson, the gang leader and the first to provide information, was never charged for his role in the murder-for-hire plot. Nancy Howard endured a living nightmare for 2 years after the attack. However, looking at her today, it's hard to recognize the pain she suffered. Nancy found strength in her faith and transformed her pain into purpose. She affirmed that she had forgiven Frank for his lies, deceit, infidelity, and breaking up their family. Nancy lost one eye, and the bullet remains lodged in her lung. Her recovery process was incredibly painful, but faith kept her strong. That same faith also allowed her to forgive those involved. She shared, I'm still in a lot of pain, but if I couldn't forgive, bitterness would take over, and my life would be controlled by that bitterness, by that anger, by that rage. Nancy believes God saved her life not so she would live in anger, but to turn her pain into purpose, to tell her survival story and help other hurt women. From a psychological perspective, Nancy's story of forgiveness is a powerful example of coping mechanisms and resilience after extreme trauma. Forgiveness is not condoning wrongdoing, but a complex psychological process that frees oneself from the burden of anger and resentment, allowing the injured person to find peace again and move on with life. It also shows that even in the darkest tragedies, the light of faith and purpose can be found.
What's the lesson here? Crime not only leaves physical wounds, but also deep psychological scars, affecting both victims and loved ones. However, human resilience is limitless, and sometimes legal justice, though necessary, is only part of the healing process. Forgiveness, though difficult, is the key to freeing the soul from the burden of the past. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about ethical boundaries in scientific research, about the responsibility of those with knowledge and power, and about the potential danger when a brilliant mind is warped by obsession and a sick ego. Vance's story reminds us that scars from the past, especially domestic violence, can leave persistent and dangerous legacies, not only for the victim, but also for society if not properly identified and healed. Ultimately, this story is a chilling indictment of a corrupted intellect, someone who believed they were freeing others by pushing them into the very abyss of tragedy. It's a reminder that unhealed pain can fester into brutal actions, and that the specter of domestic violence can haunt and reappear in the most terrifying ways, if someone is behind it, inheriting and amplifying that pain into a deadly symphony. And with all these in-depth analyses of criminal psychology, of what lies hidden behind inexplicable actions, we will collectively offer our final thoughts and the most valuable lessons from this case. Let's move on to the conclusion. Concluding thoughts, the unseen depths of the human mind. The journey through Frank Howard's case has taken us to the darkest corners of the human mind. This is not just a story of crime and betrayal, but also a deep study of an individual's corruption, of how greed, deceit, and a desire for control can transform a respected man into a cruel mastermind. We have seen how Frank Howard, with the perfect facade of a husband, a father, a respected community member, hid a double life filled with financial deception and extramarital affairs. His ability to maintain that facade for years and his coldness in planning to harm his own wife is chilling proof of his lack of empathy and inflated ego. His psychology shows a terrifying detachment from human emotion, someone who viewed his wife as an obstacle to be removed to protect his secrets and maintain his extravagant lifestyle. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about ethical boundaries in human behavior and the potential danger when a brilliant mind is warped by obsession and a sick ego. It reminds us that scars from the past, especially mental violence or emotional deprivation, can leave persistent and dangerous legacies, not only for the victim, but also for those around them. However, amidst that darkness, Nancy Howard's story shines as a beacon of unwavering will and resilience. Her miraculous survival and, more importantly, her ability to forgive the person who destroyed her life is a testament to the limitless strength of the human spirit. Nancy's forgiveness was not an acceptance of wrongdoing, but an act of freeing herself from the burden of anger and resentment, allowing her to find peace again and transform her pain into a purpose for living. What is the ultimate lesson we can learn from this case? Sometimes the greatest enemy is not a stranger lurking in the shadows, but the darkness hidden within the souls of those closest to us. Frank Howard's case is a chilling reminder of the unseen depths of the human mind, of how evil can infiltrate and flourish even in seemingly safest environments. It is a call for us to look deeper, to understand human motives and behavior more thoroughly, to be able to identify and confront the most terrifying truths before they destroy everything.
What do you think about this complex story? What psychological aspect made you think the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Behind the Crime channel to continue exploring the most terrifying psychological mysteries of crime, unveiling the truths that society often tries to hide.